A norm that creates conflicts is a perversion instead of is what the rule is supposed to do, namely to help us avoid conflicts. Only private or exclusive property makes it possible that all otherwise unavoidable conflicts can be avoided. A norm that would generate conflict, that creates conflicts, is contrary to the very purpose of a norm or a rule. The state is not only an institution that produces inferior goods, bad goods, low quality goods, but it actually produces bads. That is to say, goods that are not really goods at all, what we call bads. The state is an agency that exercises a territorial monopoly of ultimate decision making. If you can decide who is right and wrong in every case, even in cases involving yourself, then you will provoke and cause conflicts. And then, of course, decide these conflicts in your own favor. States will substitute legislation for law. They make the law. They make laws and say it is all right if I hit you on the head sometimes. A norm that creates conflicts is a perversion. If you can decide who is right and wrong in every case, even in cases involving yourself, then you will provoke and cause conflicts.
Oh, I cut it off a little early there. I think he just did a little talking, but it is what it is. Sorry, guys. Hey, this is this is Jose Galison. You're watching No Way Jose. Credit for these. This is on these Democracy of the God That Failed live reading episodes. I'm doing just there's a handful of Hoppe synth music that I've found on the Romero Synth YouTube channel. I don't know if he has it on other platforms, but I even got him to say it was cool, which I told him is like I don't believe in IP anyways, but just out of courtesy, if you don't like it, I'll stop. But I'm gonna do it in the meantime. And he replied and said, "Go for it, man." So he seems pretty dope. Definitely go check out his channel, find more stuff like that. Especially the Hoppe stuff is pretty dope. He has other stuff. There's one that's like a Kinsella one, which is actually pretty sick. But yeah, definitely go check him out. Tell him I sent you. Do in the comments. But yeah, he's definitely got some good stuff over there. So check that out. This is the No Way Jose show. I think I already said all that shit. My guest today is Toad. We're like I said, we're in Democracy of the God That Failed stuff. I do want to let you guys know if you're watching this on December 1st, you are catching the live stream. If you are not, you are catching it later, or you're a patron. The whole point I'm getting at is what happens after these. I take them down, and roughly about a week or so later, I put them back up. Make them public. So immediately after the live stream comes down, so it's a public live stream. I think I may change that soon. So, patrons out there, I'm kind of basically waiting until I get a few more because I do like the live stream aspect, but it doesn't really make sense for all of them. I'm still going to do like some things like my 4 Pony Boy series. I'm still going to do them live. Obviously, if I cover something topical, I'm not going to hold off like a week. I normally don't do things that are too entirely topical, so it shouldn't be an issue. But on the occasions that I do, yeah, it will. But even then, I'll try to give you guys some sort of perks if you're patrons. The lowest level being $2, and that'll give you at the base level, at the very least, it'll give you access to the shit in the meantime. So while it's behind the paywall, like right now, like I said, it would be you'd have access in the time between the public live stream and when it goes up publicly again. Later, obviously, you won't be the public live stream. It'll be a private live stream for only my patrons. So if you want to do that, get in on it. Only $2. But like I said, there are differing levels. The highest level is $20. $20 are my sponsors. My sponsors are Mikkel Thorpe of the Expat Money Show. I also have Jeremy, who has an Etsy store at etsy.com/shop/raisingliberty. You also can follow him on Twitter at Jeremy Rhymes. And then I also have Toad, my guest of Tower Power, which I cannot tell you. I've never been more psyched for a Tower Power episode. I mean, this is a little bit topical thing. So if you're watching this when it's out, this is out like later when it's public. Maybe it won't be hitting as hard, but on the positive side, you'll be able to go ahead and watch that episode I'm referring to because I am excited. There's a bunch of crazy yay stuff, and that's our offensive comedy show, which we sometimes kind of do a little political just because of the fact that it's kind of hard for us to avoid it. Most of the time, it's just dick joke shit like that, but if that's not your thing, don't go. If you're not trying to be, if you're easily offended, do not watch this show. If you like offensive comedy, we're your guys. But yeah, me and Toad, some of the co-hosts. We have a few more. We have Clint, we have Clint Russell, we have Reed Coverdale, TopLobsta, Fat Dave. Definitely go check that out. And also follow Toad at TPH_Toad. And that's patreon.com, just NoWayJose2020. If I didn't say that already, I forget if I did. Also, TopLobsta.com. Go get some No Way Jose merch for sure. Definitely, you can also get Tower Power merch, like I mentioned that show before just a moment ago. You also have, you can get a bunch of other shows, like basically all the other guys that I mentioned there that had shows, like Reed and Clint. Their merch is up there. Highly suggest. He also has stuff that's not podcast merch. So, I highly suggest TopLobsta.com. You so they check out for 10% off. But yeah, let's go ahead and get in here and get Toad. What's up, man?
That's right. TopLobsta Tower Power Hour merch right here. Yeah.
Hell yeah, buddy. I'm wearing TopLobsta merch right now too, but I don't have the camera. This is the Scott Horton one.
Oh, it does tanks. All right.
Yeah. Yep. I don't know. I need to figure out a way to be able to, show off the merch more. Maybe more aerial view. I need to get a higher. Right now, my laptop's in a stack of books, but I just need to make a higher stack of books. I guess I don't know.
Show off the merch, by which you mean your muscles.
Hell yeah, dog.
Yeah,
dude. I really cannot tell you how excited I am for Tower Power this coming episode, and it's
I don't even know what it's gonna be, man. It's episode.
Dude, it's gonna be just nothing but yay. There was so much in there.
So that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. No. Yes, the content. I mean, we're trying to figure out some cool guests. We'll figure out something cool. I don't know what we got. We have a couple different ideas in mind. We'll figure it out. Hey, Larry! Holy Larry! Whoa, man! $50 made you look. I love it when you make me look. It's fucking dope, dude. Appreciate you showing up. Yeah, dude, that's super nice of you. But yeah, no, appreciate you, Larry. Appreciate all people who show up and support. Like I said, Patreon for those who are interested in that. But yeah, dude, I'm excited. But I guess now, go ahead.
I like that Hoppe wave. Like you said, it was one of the least good ones. The one that we just had the intro here. That like when it picks up, I'm like, hell yeah! Like,
it does. It builds.
Gets going. That one quote, I was just laughing my ass off of that. The state does not produce goods; it only produces bads.
Like it's almost childish. It's funny. Yeah.
It's my type of humor.
Yeah, but today we're doing the live reading. So we're covering. We're covering the second half of Chapter 2 on Monarchy. That's a weird way to pronounce it. Monarchy, democracy, and the idea of natural order. So we'll be finishing off this chapter today and beginning Chapter 3 on the next one.
Yeah, and I will just say quickly because I was so out of it on the previous episode, and I think I probably corrected myself. But what Hoppe was talking about with the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was the last remnants of the gold standard going away in the U.S. in 1971, when they got rid of the gold exchange, which was people weren't allowed to own gold anymore, but countries were allowed to exchange the US dollar for gold still. And they were becoming more and more incentivized to do so because the government was printing more and more dollars and devaluing the dollar more and more. So the US was obviously afraid that there was going to be a run of these countries being like, well, we don't want this dollar anymore. We want gold because it's going to retain its value more. They were worried there was going to be this big run on the gold reserves. They didn't have enough gold anyway to back it at that point. So they're like, we can't do that. So they just cut it off, basically. Well, you can no longer exchange it for gold anymore. So that's essentially what happened.
Yeah. Well, that's nice. Let's go ahead and get into it, man.
Let's get autistic.
Yeah, I'll start off. We already covered the first half. So if you're just jumping in, maybe be a little jarring jumping in right where we're at. But, what the hell are you doing if you're starting on part 6? That's kind of a weird move. So
I don't remember exactly where we stopped either, but all right.
Yeah, I have the spot. We're on page 61.
Oh, it was at the end of the de Juvenal quote.
Yes.
I think is where we stopped.
Yeah. All right. To be sure, the monopolization of law administration led to higher prices and or lower product quality than those that would have prevailed under competitive conditions. And in the course of time, kings employed their monopoly increasingly to their own advantage. For instance, in the course of time, kings had increasingly employed their monopoly of law and order for a perversion of the idea of punishment. The primary objective of punishment originally had been restitution and compensation of the victim of a rights violation by the offender. Under monarchical rule, the objective of punishment had increasingly shifted to compensating the king instead. However, while this practice implied an expansion of government power, it did not involve any redistribution of wealth and income within civil society, nor did it imply that the king himself was exempt from the standard provisions of private law. Private law was still supreme. And indeed, as late as the beginning of the 20th century, A.V. Dicey could still maintain that for Great Britain, for instance, legislative law, public law, as distinct from pre-existing law, private law did not exist. The law governing the relationships between private citizens was still considered fixed and immutable, and government agents in their relationship with private citizens were regarded as bound by the same laws as any private citizen. That's a pretty good little paragraph there.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
So he has kind of this theme going on that he kind of mentions a lot. He kind of makes sure to throw in there, like, hey, like monarchy, was still not like the best thing. Like there was still, in some cases there was an expansion of state power and whatever, but it was just minimal compared to when he's going to, contrast it to democracy in a second. It was more minimal when compared to that. And I mean, I guess that's kind of the main point there. He's basically saying that they were under the monarchy, they were still more adherent to like a private law type of thing and more adherent to, I guess, maintaining property rights.
Yeah, and the difference being instead of taking your money through the legal system and just redistributing to everyone, it was just going to one person, the king. So it's not obviously not ideal. It'd be better if it was simply for the purposes of restitution for making right whatever wrong you did, whatever property you took from someone else or destroyed or what have you. Yeah. But in this situation, you're still kind of getting a little bit fucked there. Although it seems to be he's implying there'd still be some restitution to some degree. Yeah. But like a little bit less so than the ideal, and that it wouldn't be the prime objective. And it's kind of almost a sliding scale. The closer it gets to democracy, the less it's about restitution, and the more it's about punishment. So
exactly. So yeah, in the monarchy, like I think there was still some form of restitution there and paying the damaged party, but the king was taking some for himself. So in a way, it was like somewhat considered to be a crime against the state, but not really exactly. But then in the public form of government, the democracy, it's pretty much when you commit a criminal crime, it's entirely considered to be a crime of the state. And I think like really even rarely does the victim even like really get any sort of ample restitution, I would say. And it's all focused on like retribution instead. And we need to punish this person, Yeah.
In striking contrast, under democracy, with the exercise of power shrouded in anonymity, presidents and parliaments quickly came to rise above the law. They became not only judges, but legislator, the creator of new law. Today, notes Juvenal, we are used to having our rights modified by the sovereign decisions of legislators. A landlord no longer feels surprised at being compelled to keep a tenant. An employer is no less used to having to raise the wages of his employees in virtue to degrees of power. Nowadays, it's understood their subjective rights are precarious and at the good pleasure of authority. That's actually a pretty good. You got anything to add to that? Because that's actually, while it was a short little passage, there's a lot in there.
Yeah, I mean, he's essentially saying that because of the form of government that we're under, we've just become used to laws existing that just violate our property rights, and we don't even really think anything of it.
Yeah,
like his example, the landlord is forced to like take on a tenant that the landlord might otherwise not want to take on if they were able to voluntarily decide on that.
Yeah, which like I guess the point would be he would say in contrast with like the monarch, it'd be like the point he was kind of getting at is yes, like whenever there's some criminal or something, it wouldn't be so much the objective restitution as it would be punishment and kind of enriching the monarch or what have you.
Enriching the state. Yeah, because maybe if somebody commits something like that, like maybe they should be punished. But I think first, like restitution would be the first thing you should focus on, and then.
But the point he's kind of getting at, I think, with his private law point, that he was kind of saying that he sort of still somewhat exists in it. There is still a slight perversion of a proper private law, but it's not to the degree to where the person who did nothing wrong is necessarily being penalized directly, at least. Yeah. So, like, I guess you could make the case you're being indirectly penalized when you aren't getting like a full restitution. But I would even say in that case, it's likely they were probably getting a full restitution, but then or something close, but then the monarch was probably skimming off the top.
Yeah,
getting a little bit extra.
In the system we have now, the victim through taxes is already being forced to pay for the court system that will possibly wind up not even making them whole anyway. So it gets pretty perverted.
In a development similar to democratization of money, the substitution of government paper money for private commodity money, and the resulting inflation and increased financial uncertainty, the democratization of law and law administration has led to a steadily growing flood of legislation. So, substitution of government money for private commodity money. I don't know if does that read weird to you? Is
substitution of government paper money for private commodity money. So he's saying that the government is like replacing hard money with their own fiat money, basically.
Yeah, it just the way, I don't know, maybe I'm retarded, but the way I'm reading that is like I'm reading it like the inverse, but I know what he means. He's meaning the private, like the private's the good thing.
Right.
But I don't know, for me, and maybe
it's his German primary language going on there, I think, but I get what he's saying. Yeah.
Maybe I'm just retarded and not understanding words correctly. I don't know.
I think it's still a correct way of saying it in English.
Presently, the number, maybe I'm the retard here.
We both are.
Yeah, and I speak English. It's my primary language. So presently, the number of legislative acts and regulation passed by parliaments in the course of a single year is in the tens of thousands, filling hundreds of thousands of pages, affecting all aspects of civil and commercial life, and resulting in a steady depreciation of all law and heightened legal uncertainty. As a typical example, the 1994 edition of the Code of Federal Regulations, the annual compendium of all U.S. federal government regulations currently in effect, consists of a total of 201 books, occupying about 26 feet of library shelf space. The Code's index alone is 754 pages. And by the way, this book's probably at least a decade old, so bear that in mind. Yeah. I don't know when it was written. I could look. I don't remember exactly. The code contains regulations concerning the production and distribution of almost everything imaginable, from celery, mushrooms, watermelons, watch bands, the labeling of incandescent light bulbs, hosiery, parachute jumping, iron and steel manufacturing, sexual offenses on college campuses, to the cooking of onion rings made out of diced onions, revealing the most totalitarian power of a democratic government. Yeah, I don't know if there's really a whole lot of commentary there. I mean, if you got some, but it's definitely making the point of just kind of how these things grow.
Yeah, so this book is, if you were talking about when this book was written, I think it was like 2000.
Something like that. That
2001,
right.
Something around there. So
he said at least a decade. But
right, so he's talking about, the Code of Federal Regulations, what the size was in 94, and absolutely it has grown, even more since then. But the point is that there are so many laws on the books that, like, nobody could no single person could ever know, like, what is even in there. Like, nobody
technically
knows.
Everyone breaks multiple felonies a day.
I think
according
to Mike Chase, I think is his name, the guy that wrote that book about it's like how to be a federal criminal, where he like lists all these absolutely outrageous federal laws that nobody would ever know about or think that they're violating a law when they do this.
How to be a federal criminal exists.
I have the book. Yeah, I've read it. It's a fun read. It will outrage you, but it's fun and funny at the same time. But like there are so many laws that nobody can possibly know that. And so he says that it's an average of 3, I think, federal offenses or 3 felonies on average are committed daily by the average citizen. And we're not the average citizens here. So there are just so many laws that nobody can possibly know if they're breaking a law or not, which is kind of ridiculous, because when you think of what should a law be, and if it was if the laws are actually just encompassing protecting private property, you would kind of know that anyway. Like, it's pretty obvious to somebody, hey, I'm damaging somebody's property right now. I'm vandalizing, or I'm harming this individual. I'm injuring them. Like, really, those should be the only laws. And when it gets beyond that, and it gets to the point where you don't even know if you're breaking a law when you're just like walking down the street or something, it's so outrageous. It's ridiculous. And it obviously has nothing to do with, what is moral or anything like that. And then the other thing that he did here is he just compared the growth of the law to the inflation here. So that's, a little bit interesting. It's just an absurd expansion of it.
Yeah. Compared to the average citizen, I break way more laws, and most of the time intentionally. So, but no, it is silly because it is like, and then you wonder why anytime anyone becomes an enemy of the state, it becomes immediately easy to hammer them in any which way they want because they have a million tools in their toolbox. Because, I know one of the points that was in, I believe it was an Agris Primer with Konkin. He makes the point of, because he's kind of getting the point of like, why are you even really going out of your way? Because a lot of people really make a point to always follow the law. And it's like he's not advocating you hurt people. And he's also not advocating you get in trouble with the state necessarily. It's more of a cost risk or a risk benefit kind of analysis type thing. And, the idea being like, he made the point in there that like a company can set their prices to like he like literally pointed out a specific law that said if you raise your prices too high, price gouging, a lot of people call it, then that's illegal in a lot of ways, and you can get in this blah 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 blah. And then they also pointed out if you put your prices too low, you can that's illegal. It's like. There's no winning. So it's like, if anything, it's more just a matter of just trying to have a sober look at things, seeing what do you need to do? What do you have to stand to benefit from this given action? What is the possible risk? And move forward with that, kind of knowledge, as opposed to, oh my God, I'm going to break a law. Because if you're living by that standard, it's a fucking mess. So All right, indicators of present orientness. The phenomenon of social time preference is somewhat more elusive than that of expropriation and exploitation, and it is more complicated to identify suitable indicators of present orientation. Moreover, some indicators are less direct, softer than that of exploitation, but all of them point in the same direction and together provide as clear an illustration of the second theoretical prediction, that democratic rule also promotes short-sightedness within civil society. The most direct, it's not really anything to say there unless you have some. Most direct indicator of social time preference is the rate of interest. The interest rate is the ratio of the valuation of present goods as compared to future goods. More specifically, it indicates the premium at which present money is traded against future money. A high interest rate implies more present orientedness, and a low rate of interest implies more future orientation. Under normal conditions, that is under the assumption of increasing standards of living and real money incomes, the interest rate can be expected to fall and ultimately approach, yet never quite reach zero. For with rising real incomes, the marginal utility of present money falls relative to that of future money. And hence, under the ceteris paribus assumption of a given time preference schedule, the interest rate must fall. Consequently, savings and investment will increase. Future real incomes will still be higher, and so on. All right, this is where you come in handy, because this is a lot, especially if you're a normal person. If you're just getting into this and you're a prime autist, so I think you probably can break this down for people to be able to understand a little better. I also want to make a note for people when they're trying to understand this. Also, I think you need to keep in mind the distinction when you're reading this between, what the interest rate should be in the given society and what the interest rate is set by, the Fed or what have you. Because, but go on.
Well, yeah, I mean, the interest rate is essentially the price of money. So as he's saying here, it is how people value money right now as opposed to that money in the future. So typically, the interest rate is going to be determined by all of the, like if you have a free market, which is the scenario that you want, the interest rate will be determined by all of the people acting in that market, and like that will determine what the price. And
it will. And his point is that he was saying in a proper society, the interest rate will drop over time as you become. I believe that's how I'm reading it, and that's why I wanted to make the distinction between what the Fed sets, because we've had periods where we've had very low interest rates, and people are like, "Oh, that's great." And it's like, Yeah, but is that an artificially low one? Because this might cause a fucking problem.
Right.
Go on.
So so it would be a good thing if there was like the production, if that had actually taken place beforehand.
If it was a naturally occurring phenomenon, basically, yeah.
Right. So in the case of the government, the Fed interfering and setting it, as you said, artificially low. So the interest rate should actually be a lot higher than it is right now to actually like correct for what the state of the economy actually is. But instead, they keep it artificially low the whole time, and people think that there's a boom there because it is low. So people are going to spend more and they're going to borrow more in that scenario because they can borrow more, at a much lower interest rate, obviously, not have to pay as much back. But the issue is that savings has not been built up behind it. So right now they should actually be being incentivized to save and you need higher interest rates for that to happen. But that is not actually happening right now. So what you have is a bunch of money has been created, and there hasn't actually been like the wealth production behind it to back it up that should actually have happened to create that interest rate, that lower interest rate.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, you put that perfectly. I think it's about as good as we can get it without spending a whole episode trying to dumb it down. I mean, there are some concepts that, like, if you're just now stumbling on my channel and you just decided to get in this, or you haven't read much libertarian literature, this may be, or economic literature, this may be a little bit of a slough for you. But we're trying our best to break it down, but we can't spend the whole episode on this one paragraph. So it is what it is,
Right.
Feel free to message Toad on Twitter if you have more questions.
Right. So essentially, the interest rate should only become lower like once you've had enough of that savings behind it that a bank essentially is going to be saying, oh, we have enough money now that we need to incentivize people to borrow more of it. We need to lend it out because we have more on stock. But what's happening is that money is being created essentially artificially right now, where in like a free market scenario, that money would only be getting saved up like that in the banks if there had been a bunch of production behind it and wealth actually being created. So that money was actually, there was actually wealth behind it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. In fact, a tendency toward falling interest rates characterized mankind's suprasecular trend of development. Minimum interest rates on normal safe loans were around 16% at the beginning of Greek financial history in the 6th century BC, and fell to 6% during the Hellenistic period. In Rome, minimum interest rates fell from more than 8% during the earliest period of the Republic to 4% during the 1st century of the Empire. In 13th century Europe, the lowest interest rates on safe loans were 8%. In the 14th century, they came down to about 5%. In the 15th century, they fell to 4%. In the 17th century, they went down to 3%. And at the end of the 19th century, minimum interest rates had further declined to less than 2.5%. I mean, we kind of already broke this down a lot. If you want to add any, feel free.
He's just talking about there being a tendency for more of a free market scenario, which this is before like the monarchies were basically ousted it had the democracies coming in place of them. He's talking about before that the interest rates were overall falling.
Yeah, it's not so much a monarchy point, because he did point out the
Rome,
like the Republic. It's more,
you're right.
If anything, it would be more the point of like now we're in a situation where we have fiat money and they have much more manipulation, ability to manipulate the currency and such, whereas they didn't have, and that was actually why a lot of those republics, like I don't know, I forgot my point, but yeah, my point being is it's not so much the monarchy, although democracies have a higher tendency of doing it. I think he made a point earlier in the book that even during those periods when you had things like Rome where they had republics and such, they weren't able to do it to such a degree because the rest of the world hadn't adopted such a system, and so it would essentially hampered their ability to manipulate the currency as much. But now we're in a system where pretty much the entire world is under some sort of fiat system. Pretty much that is the case, aside from maybe like some third world tribal type shit or something. So there is no other like groups that are doing something closer to the proper thing that's going to really fuck things up, if that makes sense. All right. This trend was by no means smooth. It was frequently interrupted by periods, sometimes as long as centuries, of rising interest rates. However, such periods were associated with major wars and revolutions, such as the 100 Years' War during the 14th century, the wars of religion from the late 16th to the early 17th century, the American and French revolutions, and the Napoleonic Wars from the late 18th to the early 19th century, and the two world wars in the 20th century. Furthermore, whereas high or rising minimum interest rates indicated periods of generally low or declining living standards. I'm all tongue-tied today. The overriding opposite tendency toward low and falling interest rates reflects mankind's overall progress, its advance from barbarism to civilization. Specifically, the trend toward lower interest rates reflects the rise of the Western world, its people's increasing prosperity, farsightedness, intelligence, and moral strength, and the unparalleled height of 19th century European civilization. All right.
Right. So he's kind of just making that same point again about low interest rates versus high interest rates. And he's talking about in a more free market scenario, if the interest rates were being dictated by the actual market conditions, that this would be the case. But when the government comes in and fucks with shit, then that's when things go wrong. And that no longer really is the case. We also have fewer footnotes in this section, it looks like. So this might
looks
be a little
like
bit
that,
longer. Yeah, this is a little bit all right. With this historical backdrop and in accordance with economic theory, then, it should be expected that 20th century interest rates would be still lower than 19th century rates. Indeed, only two possible explanations exist why this is not so. The first possibility is that 20th century real incomes did not exceed or even fell below 19th century incomes. However, this explanation can be ruled out on empirical grounds, for it seems fairly uncontroversial that 20th century incomes are in fact higher. Then only the second explanation remains. If real incomes are higher, but interest rates are not lower, then the ceteris paribus clause can no longer be assumed true. Rather, the social time preference schedule must have shifted upward. That is, the character of the population must have changed. People on the average must have lost in moral and intellectual strength and become more present oriented. Indeed, this appears to be the case. So, and ceteris paribus, I think we said, means all other things remaining equal. Is that what it means? I don't even remember.
I think so. Yeah,
I forget. I'm losing my mind here. But yeah, so basically he's saying that, right. So in he was talking about the 20th century interest rates. Actually, I guess he's saying they were higher than, because I thought he was going to start talking about the government keeping them artificially low. But I think he's talking about before they were doing that, we saw interest rates rise rather than fall. And he's saying, well, why is that? And he's saying that it might make sense if people's real incomes were lower, but that was not actually the case. They were still higher, even though obviously their incomes are going to be higher as like inflation gets higher too, but their real incomes are actually higher at this point. And this, we're talking about, this was like after like the 1800s where,
he's the 20th century. We're in the 21st century right now. And
So, he's talking about the 1900s. So you're following up, the 1800s, which was like a period of like massive production basically. So people at this point, their real wage, their real incomes, were definitely higher. So he's saying this
World War I, World War II. He pointed out the war point, so this is where interest rates started coming up. And so, but like, obviously we know now we're in a period where they're low, and it's like, oh, is that really because society is so much better? We're in such a good economic condition. And I'm sure we'll get to that, but you got to keep in mind, there was a lot of wars, a lot of fucked up shit. This is when it started transitioning the entire world from monarchy to democracy too, during this key period of time. There was a lot that happened in the 20th century. And so there was a lot of economic turmoil. And I'm sure we'll get into why now they're coming back down. And even though he wrote this book before what we've seen since like 2008 and whatever, but so he is saying here that the only explanation for this would be that people's time preference schedules, that like time preference curve, like they must have actually jumped to a different curve. And their time preference has been heightened. And yes, as you were talking about, that is because the government has been doing things to shift people's time preference. So people are now
more present oriented than they were before.
Yeah,
so that's
keep in mind it was around the end of the 20th century is when we, started going more fiat, less off the gold standard, stuff like that.
Right.
So
1971 is where things all went haywire.
Yep.
And I think it was in the 1970s, I want to say, the interest rates went way up at one point, to the point where, because the government, had started, really interfering with it. I think they actually went up above 20% or something at one point, I want to say, in the 70s. And if that happened now, the whole economy would crash. So now people are saying that interest rates are really high right now, even though I think they've gone up maybe quarter of a point, half a point or whatever. And that's drastic now because we've been near zero for so long at this point. It's crazy.
All right.
From 1815 onward, throughout Europe and the West, throughout Europe, we're both tongue-tied. Throughout Europe and the Western world, minimum interest rates steadily declined to a historic low of well below 3% on the average at the turn of the century. With the onset of the democratic Republican age, this earlier tendency came to a halt and seems to have changed direction, revealing 20th century Europe and the US as declining civilizations. An inspection of the lowest decennial average interest rates for Britain, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, and the US, for instance, shows that during the entire post-World War I era, interest rates in Europe were never as low as or lower than they had been during the second half of the 19th century. Only in the US in the 1950s did interest rates ever fall below late 19th century rates. Yet this was only a short-lived phenomenon. And even then, U.S. interest rates were not lower than they had been in Britain during the second half of the 19th century. Instead, the 20th century rates were significantly higher than 19th century rates universally. And if anything, they have exhibited a rising tendency. This conclusion does not substantially change, even when it is taken into account that modern interest rates, in particular since the 1970s, include a systematic inflation premium. After adjusting recent nominal interest rates for inflation in order to yield an estimate of real interest rates, contemporary interest rates still appear to be significantly higher than they were 100 years ago. On the average, minimum long-term interest rates in Europe and the US nowadays seem to be well above 4% and possibly as high as 5%. That is above the interest rates of 17th century Europe and as high or higher than 15th century rates. Likewise, current U.S. savings rates of around 5% of disposable income are no higher than they were more than 300 years ago in a much poorer 17th century England. So, there's kind of a lot there, but he's basically saying that what we were kind of just saying that the interest rates, I guess he's referring to them as real interest rates. Maybe the interest rate, even right now, even though we see that interest rates, because the government is intervening, totally really low, close to zero, but the interest rate, given all of the other conditions, the interest rate should actually be quite high right now. And it would be, as he said, way higher than it was centuries ago. And at the same time, so the savings has not been there to back it up, which is why we need higher interest rates, because higher interest rates incentivize saving, because you're going to get more on your money when you save it, if that all makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Parallel to this development and reflecting a more specific aspect of the same underlying phenomenon of high or rising social time preferences, indicators of family disintegration, dysfunctional families have exhibited a systematic increase. And I do like when he starts pointing that out too, as more another indicator of higher time preferences. Dysfunctional families and degeneracy and things like that.
Too often people don't take into account the effects economics have on culture, how that's why I say in a certain sense you can make the case economics is everything, and this is why his time preference thing is pretty cool, because it explains a lot of cultural phenomenon as well.
That's sort of the Misesian argument. I have my hat right here. The human action, everything is human action, including economics, which is a social science. So this is the Mises Human Action podcast hat. Got it from the Mises store, baby.
Yep.
So basically what you just said, economics is just humans acting. But you could argue that everything is economic action. Or you could argue that economics is humans acting. They're the same thing.
Yeah.
You can't
Like
detach them.
I can place a value on scratching my ass.
Right. Everything is subjective value. What you spend your time on, you are making a judgment there because time is limited. So you're making a judgment there, and what is more valuable for me to spend my time on, basically. Yeah. So that's an economic action.
Yep. Till the end of the 19th
Until
century.
the end of the 19th century, the bulk of government spending, typically more than 50%, went to financing the military. Assuming government expenditures to be then about 5% of the national product, this amounted to military expenditures of 2.5% of the national product. The remainder went to government administration. Welfare spending or public charity played almost no role. Insurance was considered to be in the province of individual responsibility, and poverty relief seen as a task of voluntary charity. In contrast, as a reflection of the egalitarianism inherent in democracy, from the beginning of the democratization in the late 19th century onward came the collectivization of individual responsibility. Military expenditures have typically risen to 5 to 10% of the national product in the course of the 20th century. But with public expenditures currently making up 50% of the national product, military expenditures now only represent 10 to 20% of total government spending. The bulk of public spending, typically more than 50% of total expenditures, or 25% of the national product, is now eaten up by public welfare spending, by compulsory government insurance against illness, occupational injuries, old age, unemployment, and an ever-expanding list of other disabilities. So I don't know if there's a whole lot to add there, and I don't know what percentage of government spending is military expenditures now, because I would guess that it's gone up again since then, because the U.S. is at like so many just nonstop wars now, right? At this point, like when he wrote this book, it was before, I think he must have written this before 9/11 and those real expansions in the military state happened.
Yeah. Well, I do like in this one how the point he's kind of making on is, in a certain sense, the idea, and this kind of ties culture into economics again, is kind of the idea of how it's affected culture and affected us as just human beings in general, is the more money they take away from us, and on the promise of we're going to help people, welfare, etc. Although he does make the point most of that goes to military spending and shit that's not necessarily even that. The more so that happened, the less so we actually on an individual level contributed to those type of things. I know we as libertarians get frequently accused of being cold, callous individuals who don't want to help other people, but that's not the case. Like in a true free society, you would see there would be wealthy people and people of lesser wealth that just contribute to certain clubs or whatever, what have you. Maybe work programs for people looking for work, things like that. They would be doing that on their own dole, and there is definitely way more to be said of something who does that of their own individual volition than of someone who just is forced by essentially the gun of the government to give me your fucking money and I'll do it for you. So now you don't get that thing of doing the right thing, taking care of your fellow man, and you're also being robbed because now you're put in a situation of it's kind of a time preference thing, if you think about it, because now you're far more focused on your own individual capabilities of survival, your own resources, and you don't have this abundance of resources to where you're able to help others be able to get into a situation to where they are they're in a situation where they can take care of themselves. So.
Right. The government coming in there and saying we're doing all this, that completely disincentivizes people from helping each other, where typically before that was the case, they would people would help their family members or help their community. You had churches doing that and things like that. Way more than what happens now, because the government is just like, well, we are the welfare state now, so we're doing that. So people are just like, well, fuck it, the government's doing it. That's what my taxes are going to. I'm helping people.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit I don't think I contribute just about anything to fucking any sort of anything like that. But I'm not. If I was able to keep all my money, I would have more money and be in a situation to be able to. I would love to.
Right. That's the other thing. Yeah, exactly,
I would love to. I'd have no problem with that. There's also the thing I've been seeing more of the Salvation Army people lately, and they are
It's
such
Christmas
a
time, yeah. They come out around
like
Christmas time with the
if I
bells.
remember correctly,
Santas.
Salvation Army is like notorious for taking a shitload of money and being incredibly shitty. And in
Yeah,
truth,
I don't donate to them. No,
I don't, because I know that's like very little of that's actually going to go to someone that
Right.
matters.
Right. So I donate. Yeah, when I donate like directly to people, basically, where I know that the money's going to them. Pretty much. I would use like the DonorSee app to donate to causes for a while, and unfortunately, Gret Glyer, the creator of that, I believe, was murdered earlier this year in his 30s, which is that's another whole thing, totally ridiculous. But yeah,
there's a lot of weird conspiracies that seem to have a lot of truth when it comes to a lot of those charities, how there's slush funds for powerful entities. So not good shit.
Well, I think he was killed for personal reasons, but you never know.
Okay. All right. Consequently, by increasingly relieving individuals of the responsibility of having to provide for their own health, safety, and old age, the range and temporal horizon of private provisionary action have been systematically reduced. In particular, the value of marriage, family, and children have fallen, since one can fall back on public assistance. Yeah. Thus, since the onset of the democratic Republican age, the number of children has declined, and the size of the endogenous population has stagnated or even fallen. For centuries, until the end of the 19th century, the birth rate was almost constant, somewhere between 30 to 40 per 1,000 population, usually somewhat higher in predominantly Catholic and lower in Protestant countries. In sharp contrast, during the 20th century, birth rates all over Europe and the U.S. have experienced a dramatic decline, down to about 15 to 22 per 1,000. At the same time, the rates of divorce, illegitimacy, single parenting, singledom, and abortion have steadily increased, while personal savings rates have begun to stagnate or even fall rather than rise proportionally or even over proportionally with rising incomes. Which, to the other point of not being able to provide, if you are keeping less of your own money, it's also probably going to be harder to provide for a family as well. Right. And that wasn't his main point there too, but it is also the fact that they give you a safety net. So incentivizes, single motherhood, which I know everyone brings the case of the battered housewife. Obviously, no one's saying that's cool. But it also makes it so there's less of incentive to stick around.
The government is literally subsidizing single motherhood, so they're paying you, if you're a single mother. So they're obviously incentivizing more people to do that, and they're also incentivizing abortion by providing it, and they're definitely pushing it. Like, there's definitely a propaganda campaign around that as well. So,
yeah, I mean, they I don't know if they still do. I feel like there was something a while back where they changed a little bit, but actually, I feel like they still do. They literally, the government provides money to Planned Parenthood, which I know that people will be like,
that's what I mean. Yeah,
people will say dumb shit like, oh, well, that goes to this and that. That doesn't go for the abortion services. It's like, well, that motherfucker provides abortion, and money is fungible. So it's going to the same entity. You can say, I'm giving you this money explicitly for this reason, but it's like, but now that frees up other funds for the other thing because money is fungible.
Fine. Planned Parenthood does also, provide care for pregnant women and things like that. But they do a lot of abortions. That's kind of their primary thing. So
there are other places you could give that money that don't provide abortions, that provide all those other services.
And I don't consider an abortion to be medical care for a pregnant woman, by the way.
No,
I'm making that distinction.
I wish I could remember the name. I used to be a big follower of Crowder way back in the day, and I remember there was someone he would always push that was, and this is one that the left will typically demonize, is these people try to convince people of abortions, and they pretty much provide all the same services of Planned Parenthood. The only difference is they will not provide abortions, and they will try to counsel people on abortion and being why provide assistance of whatever one they can to help to keep the kid.
You're evil if you do that.
Yeah, which is okay, no one's making you go to that place, but if we're going to incentivize one or the two, I would prefer they don't incentivize either.
Right.
But if you're going to, it's do we incentivize the destruction of families or the production of families?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Moreover, as a consequence of the depreciation of law resulting from legislation and the collectivization of responsibility affected in particular by Social Security legislation, the rates of crimes of a serious nature such as murder, assault, robbery, and theft has also shown a systematic upward tendency. Depreciation of law resulting. Trying to think if there's anything there. He's kind of getting at the point that law is basically becoming meaningless, is kind of what he's getting at. So where it becomes more meaningless, there kind of becomes less of a rule of law in a certain way. There is whims. You always see cases of people getting off for murder for X, Y, and Z.
And there are so many more laws now that it's also impossible to enforce them all. And you're right. Like what you just said, like what we're seeing more recently is like like these democratic like cities and stuff, especially are like pretty much incentivizing people to like steal like up to $99 worth of stuff, and all these other things are just letting these people off. And like I tweeted a little bit earlier today in my neck of the woods here in Massachusetts, there was just a double murder of this old couple. And the guy that committed it had like this really long rap sheet. And like a bunch of it, you'd say, yeah, fine. It's like drug possession, drug sales, all this shit, like whatever, like non-violent stuff. But he also had like violent assaults, like robberies, all this other stuff in his rap sheet. And they had just completely dropped the charges, let him off when he like assaulted this autistic dude. Oh, and he happens to be, a druggie who's doing anything that he can to get money for it. So what happens? He gets off on all that and he winds up committing a double murder. And I think he probably murdered their dog as well.
Yeah.
Or killed their dog. Yeah.
In the normal course of events, that is with rising standards of living, it would be expected that the protection against social disasters such as crime would undergo continual improvement, just as one would expect the protection against natural disasters such as floods, earthquakes, and hurricanes to become progressively better. Indeed, throughout the Western world, this appears to have been the case by and large until recently during the second half of the 20th century, when crime rates began to climb steadily upward. To be sure, there are a number of factors other than increased irresponsibility and short-sightedness brought on by legislation and welfare that may contribute to crime. Men commit more crimes than women, the young more than the old, blacks more than whites, and city dwellers more than villagers. By the way, I would say even Hoppe would probably say it's not a direct result of them being black. There's a whole lot of other factors that go in that.
It's not black and white, you mean?
Yeah. So if anyone wants to get offended by that, literally the statistics bear this out.
13% of the population and over 50% of the violent crimes. So.
Yeah, being offended by someone saying that says more about you than it does about them. Like that's more saying that you are interpreting a certain way.
Statistic, you can't. Yeah, I mean, the numbers don't lie, but if you want to, you can debate like why that is the case.
Yes. Yeah. Accordingly, changes in the composition of the sexes, age groups, races, and the degree of urbanization could be expected to have a systematic effect on crime. However, all of these factors are relatively stable and thus cannot account for any systematic change in the long-term downward trend of crime rates. As for European countries, their populations were and are comparatively homogeneous. In the U.S., the proportion of blacks has remained stable. The sex composition is largely a biological constant. As a result of wars, only the proportion of males has periodically fallen, thus actually reinforcing the normal trend toward falling crime rates.
He's promoting war right now because it kills more men, and men are more likely to commit crimes.
I think he would also make the case too that the war itself probably incentivizes violence, towards men. So it's kind of a wash if you think about it.
At best, yeah.
Yeah, at best a wash. Similarly, the composition of age groups has changed only slowly, and due to declining birth rates and higher life expectancies, the average rate of the population has actually increased, thus helping to depress crime rates still further.
Average age.
Yeah. Finally, the degree of urbanization began to increase dramatically from about 1800 onward. A period of rising crime rates during the early 19th century can be attributed to the initial spurt of urbanization. Yet after a period of adjustment to the new phenomenon of urbanization from the mid-19th century onward, the countervailing tendency toward falling crime rates took hold again, despite the fact that the process of rapid urbanization continued for about another 100 years. And when crime rates began to move systematically upward from the mid-20th century onward, the process of increasing urbanization had actually come to a halt.
What? He's saying cities alone aren't the cause of crime? What?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say they definitely have something to do with it, but that's not the only factor. There's always a million factors to every given thing, and I'm sure he's getting to that.
Well, cities all tend to be more democratic and have that type of rule. So,
yeah, he's also talking about he was talking about like 1800 onward at that point, 19th century. I don't think he's talking modern day right at this point. So he's kind of getting to like, yeah, there's more urbanization, and that's probably going to increase it to some extent, but also if we had a true free society with a good economic system, like there still would be some level of urbanization that occurs, and there probably would be slightly higher crime rates, but not to the degree that there are now. It's obviously going to be a trade-off. If you're someone who wants to live in an urban environment, even in this free society, there are going to be, you're probably going to have more job opportunities, likely. Although I think there would be probably less urban environments in a free society, but there still would be some, and they would probably have higher crime rates. But you'd probably also have maybe not more job opportunities, but different job opportunities. So it'd be a cost benefit thing. So it's not as simple as, just urbanization, although I do think there is something to having a higher concentration of people in a given area. No shit, you're gonna have more crime. Like it's not really like
saying that it's not just demographics either.
Yeah. All right. It thus appears that the phenomenon of rising crime rates cannot be explained other than with reference to the process of democratization by a rising degree of social time preference, an increasing loss of individual responsibility intellectually and morally, and a diminished respect for all law, moral relativism, stimulated by an unabated flood of legislation.
Yeah.
I'll let you take over here because
you give me the 2 pages that have massive footnotes.
Now the notes come for you. All right, go on.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, do we have anything to talk about in that part of that?
I don't really think so.
He's just basically saying again that, it's including in these cities, you have like more democratic forms of government, essentially, where there's just an overall tendency towards like less responsibility, higher time preference, higher crime, all of that. All right. Of course, high time preference is by no means equivalent with crime. A high time preference can also find expression in such perfectly lawful activities as recklessness, unreliability, poor manners, laziness, stupidity, or hedonism.
This is where he's going to start pissing off the libertarians. I can tell you right now. I have the feeling.
Which is why we say, even though these things, we don't think that they should be enforced by law. We do not think that there should be, aggression in response to these things, but we would still say that we would want to disincentivize these things and tell people, hey, you shouldn't be doing these things.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Which is perfectly in line with libertarianism. And I would argue it is more of a pro-liberty stance.
Yes, I agree as well. That fosters a strong moral society. I do think, fosters a free society, and it's kind of almost a vicious circle, I think, in a certain sort of ways, Yes. It's also kind of like a chicken egg thing. Which comes first? I don't fucking know. It's just go for both. So
it kind of becomes like the cycle, right? Like politics being downstream from culture or whatever. They both influence each other. I believe it's cyclical. Nonetheless, a systematic relationship between high time preference and crime exists. For in order to earn a market income, a certain minimum of planning, patience, and sacrifice is required. One must first work for a while before one gets paid. In contrast, most serious criminal activities such as murder, assault, rape, robbery, theft, and burglary require no such discipline. The reward for the aggressor is immediate and tangible, whereas the sacrifice, possible punishment, lies in the future and is uncertain. Consequently, if the social degree of time preference were increased, it would be expected that the frequency in particular of these forms of aggressive behavior would rise, as they in fact did. So,
by the way, I want to make a note. I think later he may go into because I know there's a lot of passages in this book that a lot of people find objectionable, and I don't remember the specifics if I agree with him entirely or not, and we'll get to those later. But I would say, like, now once we get into these like cultural type things that he's explaining, I think even Hoppe would probably, maybe I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I feel like he'd probably admit, like, hey, this is a little bit more murky when we're saying what is good behavior. Like, what are things you should or should not be doing? This is more subjective as opposed to it's far more objective in a libertarian sense, what should or should not be something that's punished via violence or what have you, like property rights violations. Yes. So the point being is, like, you may find things later on in this book when he talks about it's objectionable, but I would say don't just be like completely discredited him. Like, if he starts talking about homosexuals, which I think he does at some point, if you find it objectionable, be like, just chalk that up to a disagreement, because this isn't a part where it is a lot more subjective. And, it's one of those things that I think in a true free society, you would kind of find out what behaviors are more conducive by the areas that are doing better. But
Right.
we're in a murky area where we're kind of just trying to read the tea leaves at this point. So some of these things that he may find objectionable, or you or me might find objectionable in a moral sense or what have you. It may not necessarily be really all that objectionable once it's borne out. But the point being is those things are things that affect you. Things, culture does matter. Your familial relationships, the way you engage in the world, even if you are not, fucking up any property rights, it matters. But now we're definitely in a spot where we're, you can kind of have a spirited debate on which behaviors are more conducive to a better life.
Right. Well, I would say, that whole thing that he just listed there with, laziness, stupidity, hedonism, all that stuff, recklessness. I would say all of that is like pretty obviously, bad, like not going to lead to
I think a little bit of hedonism every now and then is not
going to lead
bad,
to a more productive society.
Yeah.
Well, sure.
Yeah, because even hedonism is kind of subjective. What does that even mean? Are you just saying because someone plays video games occasionally? I don't know. Sometimes it's good to take some steam off. I'm not a fan of video games, but if that's your thing and you're not spending 5 hours a day or neglecting your family, whatever. Or
right. I'm talking about being like totally unproductive. And I think what he's kind of getting at here is like one of the things that we have here is that like the government makes that barrier to entry into and you could get into like the minimum wage and things like that. They make that barrier to entry to being able to get a job at all and be a productive person. They make that more and more difficult. So that's going to incentivize this person to rely on criminal activities, more so, or it might incentivize that. So I think he's sort of alluding to that fact. And then he's saying kind of what I said before, where with the murkiness of all the laws and the legal system, how many laws there are, that you're thinking like present oriented, like, you're more likely to be poor at this point. So it's like, I need more of the stuff. You might be more likely to steal or commit a crime or something like that to get that stuff. And so you're more present oriented, but you're also thinking, even if you're future oriented to some degree, you're still thinking like, hey, like they might not catch me or something like that, or I might not suffer consequences for this. Yeah. Whereas, if you took the government out of there and you allowed people to defend their own property and things like that, that really wouldn't be the case. Like, gun ownership and things like that, people would be way more disincentivized to be like, hey, I'm just going to go steal from this guy. Well, because this guy, might have a gun and he's actually allowed to defend himself. So
yeah, I would also think too, in this cultural point I was making, you could almost make a time preference argument to it. Because like I kind of brought up hedonism, and you could apply, say, something like sexuality. Like let's say, for example, like when me and my wife are about to hit it off, we're about to bang. At that moment in time, I'm very present oriented and I'm very much trying to get laid. But now if my life becomes consumed with just trying to have sex with my wife or just sex in general, it's not a good thing. And there are, and I guess there might be something to be said. And Hoppe makes the point. I think he made the point earlier. It's not necessarily always a negative thing to be present oriented in a given situation. Sometimes it's actually the right course of action.
Well, right. Like my example was, if somebody is threatening to kill you, like they're in your face right now and they're about to kill you, obviously you have to be present oriented and defend yourself.
Yeah. But now if you're always present oriented in whatever given, factor of life, that's going to be a problem.
But Jose, you're supposed to only be using the sex to make the babies. So you need to be more future oriented, sir.
Yeah. I guess you could also make a case that the sexuality is a little bit future oriented, but you get my point. Yeah.
All right. Conclusion: monarchy, democracy, and the idea of natural order, which I think is actually the title of the chapter as well. From the vantage point of elementary economic theory and in light of historical evidence, then, a revisionist view of modern history results. The Whig theory, that's W-H-I-G, of history, according to which mankind marches continually forward toward ever higher levels of progress, is incorrect. From the viewpoint of those...
Which, real quick, I want to say that's probably the operandi modus, or whatever the fucking term is, of most people, modus operandi of most people. Like that is kind of, I feel like before I got like red pill, that's kind of the vibe most people have, because that is kind of what you're taught, that humankind is always progressing. And I mean, I'm sure you could probably make a case that
that's what progressivism is.
Yes, exactly. And that's why progressivism has infiltrated so many things. So that's kind of what it is. And it's not always the case. There are definitely cases of stagnation or regression or even progressing, but not to the degree to which you could be progressing, essentially.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think the argument is going to be that, like with government not existing there, that those periods are going to be fewer of them, and they will be less drastic, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay.
From the viewpoint.
Yes, from the viewpoint of those who prefer less exploitation over more, and who value farsightedness and individual responsibility above short-sightedness and irresponsibility, the historic transition from monarchy to democracy represents not progress, but civilizational decline. I love lines like that where he just kind of like hammers that in. Nor does this verdict change if more or other indicators are included. Quite to the contrary. Without question, the most important indicator of exploitation and present-orientedness not discussed above is war.
Yep.
Yet, if this indicator were included, the relative performance of Democratic Republican government appears to be even worse, not better. In addition to increased exploitation and social decay, the transition from monarchy to democracy has brought a change from limited warfare to total war, and the 20th century, the age of democracy, must be ranked also among the most murderous periods in all of history.
I do love how he makes the point that the war is one of the worst things we do, and as a result, it has one of it is the thing that has the worst result on us, even down to a cultural level. Yeah, is kind of the point he's making, and I think there is something to that because we like to look at war as this thing that's far off, and actually, we talked about this a while ago, that like domestic policy is in a certain sense matters more because it's a more immediate concern, but in an ultimate sense, war does matter more. But even then, the domestic policy in a certain sense is war as well. It's the war of the government against you.
Oh yeah, the COVID shit is definitely a war. Yeah,
I mean, it's to a lesser degree, so it actually probably has a lesser effect on us, but it's a more immediate effect. So in the order of operations of which things you should tackle and which things you actually have control over, the domestic things are going to be, what you can control. But war is the worst thing the government does and is the thing that has the most profound effect on us down to a family fucking unit, like down to just the behavior in which people, operate under. Like it's just cancer. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then the more like domestic stuff, I think, as you were saying, kind of just gets put on top of that. It's like, well, I have to deal with this first because this is an immediate threat to me. Like I have to make sure that I'm not going to have this vaccine forced into me and shit like that. Like I have to worry about myself right now.
Yeah. And like my point too, is like, it's with war. What am I going to do other than not join the military and do my best to keep my wealth to myself and not give it to the government to contribute to war to the best that I can, whatever degree is the most possible, most, feasible. Thus, inevitably, two final questions arrive. The current state of affairs can hardly be the end of history. What can we expect and what can we do? As for the first question, the answer is brief. At the end of the 20th century, democratic republicanism in the U.S. and all across the Western world has apparently exhausted the reserve fund that was inherited from the past. For decades until the 1990s boom, real incomes have stagnated or even fallen. The public debt and the cost of social security systems have brought on the prospect of an imminent economic meltdown. At the same time, the societal breakdown and social conflict have risen to dangerous heights. If the tendency toward increased exploitation and present-orientedness continues on its current path, the Western democratic welfare states will collapse as the East European Socialist People's Republics did in the late 1980s. Hence, one is left with the second question. What can we do now in order to prevent the process of civilizational decline from running its full course to an economic and social catastrophe?
And this is, Hoppe's thing, like what must be done, basically. Where I don't know if he gets into it here, but he does, he will talk about, well, we need to decentralize. We need to put ourselves in a situation where, where the closest people around us are people that are going to be people like that more, I guess, kind of agree with us culturally, I would say, is one of the points that he makes. And also we're talking about having much more localized or even non-existent governments and things like that we have to worry about. Like we're just going to be ignoring larger governments and things like that.
Which I do want to say, what must be done if you're listening to this? That was, I believe, an essay or even a speech that later became an essay or vice versa of Hoppe's. And I believe you can find the speech. I believe he's done it as a speech online. And also Pete Quinones has done a live reading on it if you want to check it out on the Pete Quinones show. It was very good. I don't remember who his guests were, but that's good. I would say for me personally, I've a lot of people know if you follow this channel, I've even mentioned here, I'm more of the agorist. So that's not my 100% ideal praxis, but I've said many times in my personal opinion, if I'm not convinced of agorism, that's the next practice would think is the best. And I've said before, I think Konkin and Hoppe are really the only ways forward. I'm very, 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 very sympathetic to that path. And the what must be done path. So definitely check it out. I highly suggest it. It's good reading. It's where Hoppe lays out his praxis, which basically is what must be done. That's when we're talking about praxis.
Yeah, and me, I'm more on that train. Yeah, I'm on the Hoppe train, so
which I can sympathize with. I think there's a lot to be taken from it. Even if you are an agorist guy, I've talked to Hoppians before, and I actually think like agorists and like if you had a community that was like a Hoppian community that also had agorists in it too, I think they would. They would get along just fine. I know, like, depending. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some shitty agorists, but, someone who actually understood what Konkin said and takes it to heart and isn't a complete degenerate, I think
you're the only non-shitty one that I know, Jose.
Yeah, I know. I say the worst thing about agorism is agorists. I see you in the chat, Quest Fanning. Thanks for showing up, man.
I was going to mention one thing on that. Oh, so he's this is interesting, like that paragraph that you just read. If you just look at that and you kind of apply it to like the situation we're at now, where that's become even more the case. He was talking about how throughout like the 1990s, real wages had actually started to like go down and be on the decline. So people actually have less real income now. And now with everything that's happened, like since he's written this book, it's become even worse. So like when I read this again in like 2020, I was thinking like, holy shit, like this is like, everything that he's saying like is just happening to more and more of an extent. And we're, that's what we're up against. We're up against this, man. Yeah. So that and more of the societal breakdown and just all of that.
Above all, the idea of democracy and majority rule must be delegitimized. Ultimately, the course of history is determined by ideas, be they true or false. Just as kings could not exercise their rule unless a majority of public opinion accepted such rule as legitimate, so will democratic rulers not last without ideological support in public opinion. Right. Likewise, the transition from monarchical to democratic rule must be explained as fundamentally nothing but a change in public opinion. In fact, until the end of World War I, the overwhelming majority of the public in Europe accepted monarchical rule as legitimate. Today, hardly anyone would do so. On the contrary, the idea of monarchical government is considered laughable, in which to some degree it makes sense. And I even think Hoppe, I think he may have made a point of that before, but it is what it is.
Well, there's a reason why the government takes hold of the entire corporate press and academia and all of that. All the public schools, they are trying to propagandize you and normalize all of this like in your minds that they don't even want people to think about it really. Like this is the way it is. You have to be used to it. So, there's a reason why they do that and there's a reason why they crack down on anybody speaking out against any of it, as we've been seeing more and more. So all of that is certainly very important. Changing people's minds. Yeah. Yeah.
Which I would say monarchy is laughable, but once you really start to understand democracy, it's even more laughable. So,
right. I think one of the points that probably Hoppe, I think, is making throughout this book is that, yes, it is laughable, but it's more obviously laughable.
Yep. Consequently, a return to the ancient regime must be regarded as impossible. The legitimacy of monarchical rule appears to have been irretrievably lost. Nor would such a return be a genuine solution. For monarchies, whatever their relative merits, do exploit and do contribute to present-orientedness as well. Rather, the idea of democratic Republican rule must be rendered equally, if not more, laughable. not in the least by identifying it as the source of the ongoing process of deciviliization. Yeah, you just said what I was going to say.
Yeah, exactly. So he is saying they're both, laughable. However, in the public opinion now, monarchy is considered to be way more laughable than democracy, and he wants to reverse course on that. He wants them both to be considered laughable and democracy to be considered way more laughable than monarchy, basically.
But at the same time, and still more importantly, a positive alternative to monarchy and democracy, the idea of a natural order must be delineated and understood. On the one hand, this involves the recognition that it is not exploitation, either monarchical or democratic, but private property, production, and voluntary exchange are the ultimate sources of human civilization. On the other hand, it involves the recognition of a fundamental sociological insight, which incidentally also helps identify precisely where the historic opposition to monarchy went wrong. That the maintenance and preservation of a private property-based exchange economy requires a sociological presupposition, the existence of a voluntarily acknowledged natural elite, a nobilitas naturalis, which it is funny. A lot of libertarians shun the idea of elites, but it's like the point Hoppe makes in a true free society, and he kind of gets in this. Is actually one of the benefits of monarchy, but that concept of the natural elite gets corrupted. Thanks, Quest. I saw you just shared it. Hell yeah, man. Yeah,
that's not a little following either.
No, not at all. yeah, you're definitely one of my favorite mutuals. Hopefully, I don't know if you follow me on my current account, but hopefully I'll get my old accounts back here soon. I'm Senor Jose 2020, dog. I think you might follow me. I don't know. But yeah, that was kind of the one of the good things about monarchy was the natural elites, but it got corrupted by the idea of the fucking of the government in general. It got because the government's cancer.
So Hoppe talks a lot about natural elites because he's saying that essentially what is just human nature is that hierarchy has to exist. You do need natural elites because people have different skill sets. Certain people are better at certain things than other people are. Like that's just a fact of human nature. So in a situation where the government is not essentially artificially selecting the elites, or as he would say, unimpressive elites and things like that, that in that like free market scenario, and even in a monarchy that kind of more mimics that type of scenario, you have more of the tendency towards people selecting natural elites. Like, hey, we know this person is actually good at this thing. Like, let's do this. And then I guess the other aspect of that would be that the government actually will kind of incentivize the so-called experts to become on their sides. Then you have like guys like Fauci, where people are like, hey, they think that this guy is a natural elite. Like this guy is, he knows what he's talking about. He's a doctor, all of that. He's the expert, where, the actuality is he is a liar who's bought and paid for by the government.
Mm-hmm. The natural outcome of the voluntary transactions between various private property owners is decidedly non-egalitarian, hierarchical, and elitist. As a result of widely diverse human talents, in every society of any degree, a complexity of few individuals quickly acquire the status of an elite. Owing to superior achievements of wealth, wisdom, bravery, or a combination thereof, some individuals come to possess natural authority, and their opinions and judgments enjoy widespread respect. Moreover, because of selective mating and marriage and the laws of civil and genetic inheritance, the positions of natural authority are more likely than not passed on within a few noble families. It is to the heads of these families with long-established records of superior achievement, farsightedness, and exemplary personal conduct that men turn with their conflicts and complaints against each other. And it is these very leaders of the natural elite who typically act as judges and peacemakers, often free of charge, out of a sense of obligation required and expected of a person of authority, or even out of a principled concern of civil justice as a privately produced public good.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's too much to add to that. It's kind of points that he's made before, but I guess basically in the monarchical scenario, I guess it's more likely that the king or the ruler will want to sort of exemplify why they are that sort of chosen elite, and they, they're sort of they can be held more accountable than can somebody in like the more democratic system, I suppose.
And to a point we were making earlier with the idea of like the welfare state and how it takes away individual responsibility with the lack of a government, or even like a monarchy or a lesser government, you, especially with these type of entrepreneurs, people who rise to given scenarios because of their station, their abilities within whatever given field they're in, these are going to be people who are generally exceedingly wealthy or have skills that they can contribute, and they're going to likely, be typically they're typically going to want to give back, and they don't have this entity, the government, or there's less to be gained from this government in this situation that will be able to, corrupt them in any way. So the things they will be doing will be just, because they have something to give, they want to contribute, they want to have a legacy to their name, what have you, So it's kind of that same concept we laid out earlier, but given to its logical degree when you get to people that have, more, way more than they really need to be able to get by. And they've gone to a point where they can provide for their progeny and probably their progeny, their progeny's progeny and et cetera, to the point where it's like, hey, I'm just, what am I going to do with my wealth? I can do something good for the world. And then there's also, to that point too, they don't have this corrupting idea, because a lot of these people, even in modern day society, a lot of these, even these sort of natural elites, a lot of them have bought into the idea that the government's a good thing. So a lot of them do get involved in these government programs and et cetera, because they think, hey, I can help out, I can, whatever. Whereas in a free society, they would be able to, more effectively use their funds in a good way. So.
Yeah. All right. In fact, the endogenous origin of a monarchy, as opposed to its exogenous origin via conquest, can only be understood against the background of a prior order of natural elites. The small but decisive step in the transition to monarchical rule, the original sin, consisted precisely in the monopolization of the function of judge and peacemaker. The step was taken once a single member of the voluntarily acknowledged natural elite, the king, insisted, against the opposition of other members of the social elite, that all conflicts within a specified territory be brought before him, and conflicting parties no longer choose any other judge or peacekeeper but him. From this moment on, law and law enforcement became more expensive. Instead of being offered free of charge for a voluntary payment, they were financed with the help of a compulsory tax. At the same time, the quality of law deteriorated. Instead of upholding the pre-existing law and applying universal and immutable principles of justice, a monopolistic judge who did not have to fear losing clients as a result of being less than impartial in his judgments could successively alter the existing law to his own advantage.
That's cool. He's making the point that essentially with the step towards monarchy, which, he is making the point it's preferable to democracy. Essentially, the monarch, probably likely in some ways, may even have been from a what he thought was doing something good. He essentially monopolized a lot of the functions of the natural elite, and it became more consolidated within him. So you became more dependent on this one individual who likely, especially in the early days of the monarchies, was more likely to be a natural elite and, of some sort. And now you're more relying on this one guy to be doing what you need him to be doing.
Right. And he's referring to, basically like the rise of like a state as the original sin. And he's essentially saying that like anarchy is the most preferable, monarchy is a step backward from that, and democracy is a step way backward from that. Is sort of how he outlines it.
It's a long jump away from it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I don't know about like, as far as like, because I've read like James Scott's Against the Grain and whatever, where he talks about like the first book. Yeah, it is a good book. It'll definitely change your way of thinking, even though he is a leftist. So I think there are certain economic things that he doesn't get right. But
he says that though. But some people, especially anarchists, sometimes use that left label in like an old timey way. Like I remember reading Benjamin Tucker because I was reading the Anarchist Handbook, and a lot of the shit he was describing, even though he got like his economics wrong, he very much was like an anarchist, and like he really wasn't like saying, aside from his like minutia of understanding of economics, he really wasn't espousing much more different than we were, at least from that one essay. I don't know much more of him aside from that. So
Scott. So I mean, he approaches it from more of like a historian's perspective, I would say, where he talks a lot about the history of like when the first states were created and that. And I don't think they were really like monarchies, but I don't really know, because he doesn't necessarily get into like the type of government, but more like how they rose and like started functioning. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting because Hoppe here is kind of starting more like with the monarchies, like maybe even in like the Middle Ages and things like that. But Scott goes all the way back to like whatever, like even like 5,000 BC probably.
Yeah, which I really feel like if you do read that book,
civilization.
especially in modern days, it kind of gives you an insight to, you know, where we are now and where we may be in the future as well. I don't really have time to go into that. I've actually talked about it before, so, you know.
Yeah.
But go on.
Where am I at here?
It was to a large extent the inflated price of justice.
Yes, it was to a large extent the inflated price of justice and the perversions of ancient law by the kings, which motivated the historical opposition to monarchy. However, confusion as to the causes of this phenomenon prevailed. There were those who recognized correctly that the problem lay with monopoly, not with elites or nobility. But they were far outnumbered by those who erroneously blamed it on the elitist characters of the rulers instead, and who accordingly strove to maintain the monopoly of law and law enforcement and merely replace the king and the visible royal pomp by the people and the presumed modesty and decency of the common man. Hence the historic success of democracy. Yeah, so that's also an interesting paragraph there, because a lot of it has to do with like not recognizing correctly what the problem actually is. And like he's saying that you do need those elites, like we were saying, and people that are, I don't know if I'd necessarily call them the nobility, but maybe like the natural elites. Like you do need people like that. But the problem is when people have like a monopoly on power, a monopoly on the use of force is when the problem arises.
Yep.
And that, when it it comes to democracy, he's saying it's a step backward, where people actually saw that as a step forward, because, hey, even people that like sort of knew, hey, this monarchy is a problem, they misidentified the problem and went a step backward instead of, taking the right step.
Yeah.
Okay. Ironically, the monarchy was then destroyed by the same social forces that kings had first stimulated when they began to exclude competing natural authorities from acting as judges. Yeah, so it's being destroyed by more territorial monopolism, basically, and use of force. In order to overcome their resistance, kings typically align themselves with the people, the common man. Appealing to the always popular sentiment of envy, kings promise the people cheaper and better justice in exchange, and at the expense of taxing, cutting down to size their own betters, that is, the king's competitors. When the king's promises turned out to be empty, as was to be predicted, the same egalitarian sentiments which they had previously courted now focused and turned against them. After all, the king himself was a member of the nobility, and as a result of the exclusion of all other judges, his position had become only more elevated and elitist, and his conduct only more arrogant. Accordingly, it appeared only logical then that kings too should be brought down, and that the egalitarian policies which monarchs had initiated be carried through to their ultimate conclusion: the monopolistic control of the judiciary by the common man.
The funny thing is, as you were reading this, it reminded me of the Bible. Like, I'm not religious. Most people that follow my channel know I'm an atheist. But I grew up in the church. I've read the Bible, and there is definitely historical context to be taken. And there definitely was, I guess this might be something that speaks to a lot of people, because a lot of people don't have a historical understanding of monarchs. I know, biblically speaking, the kings, there were multiple, times where the kings basically operated as a judge. And I think even before the kings, they had judges of sorts. I believe, if I remember correctly, it's kind of what Judges was about. Although they weren't technically monarchs at that time, that was almost like I'm sure, Popular Liberty, if he's watching, is probably nutting his pants. He always goes about how that was like one of the early anarchist sort of societies of sorts, or private, governments, whatever he wants to call it.
Well, but, everybody brings up ancient Ireland, and stuff like that, where they kind of had like these roaming judges, and
but you look at that, and it was like, that was the original thing they took on. They took on essentially the court system. They were that system. That's kind of how it started, which it makes sense, because we even talk about from a private society, you need those. But the problem is, once you consolidate it to one, and then you give them the force behind that, it becomes an issue.
Yeah, I sort of like how he kind of like talks about egalitarianism kind of throughout this whole thing as being contrary to liberty, which I think that's like one of kind of his main points. And Rothbard also has made that point, with egalitarianism being a revolt against nature and things like that. It requires massive force to even attempt to make people equal.
Yep.
Right? Like, people are better than others at different things. That's just the way that it is. Everybody's an individual. So any attempt at egalitarianism is going to require force and going to be a step way in the wrong direction. Predictably, as explained and illustrated in detail above, the democratization of law and law enforcement, the substitution of the people for the king, made matters only worse, however. The price of justice and peace has risen astronomically, and all the while, the quality of law has steadily deteriorated to the point where the idea of a law as a body of universal and immutable principles of justice has almost disappeared from public opinion and has been replaced by the idea of law as legislation, government-made law. That's right, with it, just the typical thing. Everybody say, well, there should be a law against this, just because I think that this is how it should be.
Real quick, I did want to add on my biblical point. Anyone who knows their Bible knows that God explicitly, when they wanted to go to a king, God was like, this basically like, this is fucking dumb. And then they did, but if you want to do it, whatever. And they end up doing it. And prior to that, they had more of a judges system. So that's kind of a similar situation he's kind of describing here. So I think that may illustrate the concept a little bit better for a lot of people.
Yeah, I am a Christian. I had sort of like a Christian upbringing in like the New England congregational churches. Basically, I have family on my dad's side that is definitely very religious. They're Congregationalists. I went away from it, in my rebellious teens, essentially, where I was basically like agnostic, maybe like an atheist, but not like militant about it in any way, really. And then I got back to Christianity more recently and picked up the Bible again, started reading it again. And yes, I believe that looking at it again, like being a libertarian, now being an ANCAP now, I would say that yes, anarchy is totally compatible with Christianity. And in the Bible, yes, I believe it is. It's like never actually, like people use, like Rome, that verse in Romans, whatever it is, Romans 11, maybe, I forget what it is, or Romans 13, I think, where people are saying that there's a verse there that is explicitly saying that you should abide by like the king's law or whatever. And I don't agree with that at all. I think that it is essentially, the Bible is telling you that God is your only king, and that is the only law.
I had Jacob Daniel. It was one of my first episodes. I had Jacob Winograd on. We talked about that, and it is kind of funny if you read it in a certain sense, especially from our perspective. It's almost like Jesus being a smartass, because I believe he was asked it by the Pharisees or something along those lines, somebody of that ilk, and it was like we give unto Caesar what's due to Caesar, but that like everyone goes, oh well, that means give it to the king. Like no. Like, what is due to Caesar? Like, that is kind of like a trick question, like a trick, like there. Like, well, what is due to Caesar? Is that really due to Caesar? Like, so it's almost like a smart ass answer, like in a way, like kind of if it was anything, it was you could almost look at it as a way to exhibit Jesus's wisdom of getting out of a tough situation and kind of like, being like kind of a smart, quippy way to kind of be like, fuck you.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like if you're reading it from our perspective. But even as me, I'm an atheist. I'm not a militant atheist by any means. But you can even look at that book from a like I just right now kind of looked at it from a historical perspective, because there's definitely historical things in there, and that they definitely I guarantee you that was to somewhat degree true what that happened there. I guarantee you the original Israelites probably did operate under a judge system of some sorts, and then they became under a monarchy, and then the monarchy eventually went to shit. And there's definitely lessons to be taken out of that, as we are doing right now. But at the same time,
the same time, democracy has succeeded where monarchy only made a modest beginning in the ultimate destruction of the natural elites. The fortunes of great families have dissipated, and their tradition of culture and economic independence, intellectual farsightedness, and moral and spiritual leadership has been forgotten. Rich men still exist today, but more frequently than not, they owe their fortune now directly or indirectly to the state. Hence, they are often more dependent on the state's continued favors than people of far lesser wealth. They are typically no longer the heads of long-established leading families, but nouveau riche, so the new riches. Their conduct is not marked by special virtue, dignity, or taste, but is a reflection of the same proletarian mass culture of present-orientedness, opportunism, and hedonism that the rich now share with everyone else. Consequently, their opinions carry no more weight in public opinion than anyone else's.
Yep. The artificial elite, the corrupting influence of the government.
Right. I love all that. Yeah, he makes the point again that they are, they have high time preference, just like, the people do. They just create this atmosphere of high time preference, all across the board. And forget what the other point that I was going to make is, but basically, just something about like the, once those like non-natural elites sort of get into the system there, then you have people that really don't deserve that status in that position. And
even if they are a natural elite, the point he's making is they're a lot of their wealth is owed to the government. So it's like, it was kind of the point I was making to before, like, why do these natural elites not operate in the way we'd want to? Because a lot of people may present that as like a gotcha to like Hoppe's like, natural elite theory. It's like, well, no, the current natural elite and the artificial elite both have this influence under them that kind of fucks with their incentives and makes it so that, they aren't really able to do as much. And they may, even coming from a good, type of, what they think is doing good, because they are fooled by the government. Just because they're a natural elite doesn't mean they know everything about political theory or what have you.
Right.
So like they, it's going to fuck with how they operate as well. So
I just like how the like unimpressive elites, like it's just becoming more and more transparent. We have people like Biden and Fetterman getting into like big positions of power, and it's like, well, like how is that deserved at all? Like you have these people that can't form a coherent sentence, and they're going to be making decisions for like huge amounts of people, for essentially for 300 million people. Like it's,
and then you contrast it against somebody like a Elon Musk, who I think is likely probably a natural elite. I don't know a ton about him, but he's also not able to do as much as he would like to probably be able to do, because he has taken a lot of money from the government. He has to follow probably certain rules in accordance with the government, et cetera, et cetera. But even then, you see some of the shit he's clearly trying to do. And I'm not saying he's perfect. I don't know. He also could be controlled opposition. There's always that. I don't fucking know. But that's kind of the vibe.
He definitely is a natural elite to some extent, because that's how he kind of rose in the first place. But then you have like the government kind of tries to like start controlling those particular types of people. But definitely he like knows what he's doing as like an entrepreneur, and he wouldn't have risen to the status that he did like before the government got involved and things like that, and before he became like as huge as he is now. He wouldn't have risen to that level if he wasn't some form of elite in that respect.
All right, one more giant paragraph and we're out here, guys. Hence, when democratic rule has finally exhausted its legitimacy, the problem faced with it will be significantly more difficult than when kings lost their legitimacy. Then it would have been sufficient to abolish the king's monopoly of law and law enforcement and replace it with a natural order of competing jurisdictions, because remnants of natural elites who could have taken on this task still existed. Now this will no longer suffice. If the monopoly of law and law enforcement of democratic governments is dissolved, there appears to be no other authority to whom one can turn for justice, and chaos would seem to be inevitable. Thus, in addition to advocating for the abdication of democracy, it is now of central strategic importance that at the same time ideological centralization or decentralizing or even successionist social forces. In other words, the tendency toward political centralization that has characterized the Western world for many centuries, first under monarchical rule and then under democratic auspices, must be systematically reversed. Even if as a result of a secessionist tendency, a new government, whether democratic or not, should spring up, territorial smaller governments and increased political competition will tend to encourage moderation as regards exploitation. In any case, only in small regions, communities, or districts will it be possible again for a few individuals, based on the popular recognition of their economic independence, outstanding professional achievement, morally impeccable personal life, and superior judgment and taste, to rise to the rank of natural, voluntarily acknowledged authorities and lend legitimacy to the idea of a natural order of competing judges and overlapping jurisdictions, an anarchic private law society as the answer to monarchy and democracy.
Yeah, so that some of the stuff that you just talked about there is like one of the points that I think like the classical liberal types and like loser brigade types and things like that, they really don't get. And I think they're still kind of programmed to just oppose secession. Like secession is bad, like maybe conflate it with slavery and things like that. And they'll try to make points like, anti-secessionist points by saying that, like, well, if a fascist government rises up, that's still anti-libertarian, man. And it's like, yeah, we know that. But as Hoppe was saying here, when you have a totally decentralized system, you have secession and you create multiple smaller governments, that is going to be a better situation than when you have a centralized government, because those governments actually have to start competing against each other and they start being able to get away with less. So yes, of course, it's not perfectly libertarian, but it is a step in the right direction.
In a more localized area, it's going to be more easier to identify natural elites, and it's also going to be harder for these smaller governments to be able to corrupt the natural elites that exist, and will also make the artificial elites more apparent as artificial elites.
Right.
So,
they can be held more accountable, and then, like what we're seeing with the COVID shit, you have people can move out of a state and into another state, where a lot of people move to Florida, and we're telling you, hey, this is a government that we prefer over this other government because they're cracking down on us way less.
Yeah. All right, man, let's get the fuck out of here. This is a long one. Go ahead and drop your plugs.
Yeah, this is a meaty part of the chapter.
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting stuff in this one. I think we're starting to get some of the juicy stuff. We were doing like 15 pages episode. We might have to go down to 10 if it stays this intriguing. Because I know the beginning, for people who follow this long, the beginning was a little bit of a slog. I mean, it was still interesting, but now I think it's starting to get to the juicy shit.
Yeah, maybe because of that we talked more too. But this chapter, I think, definitely had way fewer of the footnotes. This is a very footnote heavy.
Well, not even the footnotes. I just feel like the stuff we covered was more conversation spurring.
Yeah. That's what I'm also saying. Yeah, that is the case. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah. TPH_Toad on Twitter. I do Tower Power Hour, which is soon. I think we're starting to call it Tower Gang. Are we telling people that?
I think, yeah, we're about to rebrand as Tower Gang. By the time this comes out, I think we'll be rebranded already.
Yeah, so we have episode 100 next week. We've been going on for almost 2 years at this point, and we hit episode 100 next week. We're going to do something for it. We're obviously going to be talking about the Kanye, Alex Jones stuff that happened today, and see if we get like a cool guest on or something like that. But we'll have a big 100th episode next week. That's going to be me, Jose, Fat Dave, a.k.a. Cole, TopLobsta, Clint from Liberty Lockdown, and maybe Reed Coverdale if he ever decides to show up again. We're on Wednesday nights at 9:11 p.m. Eastern, and we did an episode last night, which I thought was pretty fun. It's always fun.
Yeah, it was fun. That was a fun episode, yeah.
Yeah, I don't even remember what we talked about. We talked about shaving our armpits and shit.
Yeah, it was a fun one. That was definitely a fun one. We just to get an idea of the show, if you want to watch Tower Power, just to get an idea what our show is, for this next episode, the guest we're really trying to get, we have our fans on the case. We have Clint, our guy with a lot of pull, talking to big dogs, trying to make it happen. Who we are really trying to hit for episode 100, or at least not, or maybe later, we are really trying to get the father of that latest gay club shooter, because if you haven't checked out his interviews, don't get me wrong, tragic event. Dude is like hilarious.
He's insane. Yeah.
He is an insane human being. And so that's the kind of show you're dealing with there. I don't know if we'll pull it off. Clint seems to think it's actually pretty likely. I'm more in he said it's 60% likely. I'm I think it's more like 30, 35. We'll find out. So
that's probably more accurate.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's overestimating his pull.
He's a former porn star and meth head, basically.
Yes. He's been on intervention, been on 300 porns. He had a son who ended up shooting a gay club. His first concern was that the kid was gay and not so much that he killed people. Truth is stranger than fiction type scenario.
And last time on Tower Power Hour, we watched videos of him paying people to kick him in the balls. Pretty much.
Yeah, it was fun stuff. Definitely, if you didn't check that show, just definitely go check it out if that's something that sounds like something you'd be interested in. If you got offended by the idea that we would even talk to that person, probably not for you. We probably can get by with this show though. I only every now and then get a little bit spicy on this, so I think it'll be all right. Just the right amount of spicy. But yeah, this was the No Way Jose show. You can find me on YouTube, all the major odd podcasters, Odyssey as well. You can follow me on Twitter at SeniorJose2020. Quest just sent a super chat. He said, "Have a great one, folks. Thanks for showing up, man. Appreciate it." I also forgot to mention I have on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, I forget the date, what Tuesday is, but if you're watching this on the 1st, it'll be coming up. But if you're watching this when this goes public later, it'll already be out, so you can go watch it. I have what's called the Four Pony Boys, which is totally just a ripoff of Reed's Four Horsemen, but it's me. It'll be me, TopLobsta, Reed Coverdale, Clint Russell, and our guest will be Patriot J. It'll definitely be a fun one, especially in light of a lot of the Trump stuff. He's a big Trump guy, and then also the Ye stuff. He's a big Ye guy. It'll be a fun episode for sure. I definitely think you should check that out. And yeah, if you want to support me, patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. With that, we are out. Appreciate when it shows up. Please share these around, especially where this is such a long series. It'll definitely help if you guys push it around, because when you're dealing with like long series, the views really drop off once you get a few deep into it, because it starts getting more and more niche the longer it goes on. So I appreciate who shows up, and with that, we are out.
Peace out.